Let's talk about nightmares. They're this universal human experience, right? A private little horror movie that plays out in our heads while we sleep. But what are they, really? Are they just random noise from our brains, or could they be something much more? Okay, let's get into it and explore the many meanings of a nightmare.
Of course you have. We've all been there. That sudden jolt awake, the cold sweat, that feeling of dread that just sticks with you. It's this incredibly personal yet totally universal experience. But it does make you wonder, when does a simple bad dream cross the line into something else?
Well, for some people, it's not just an occasional thing. It becomes what's officially known as nightmare disorder. And the clinical definition isn't just about having a scary dream. The real key here is the aftermath, the serious distress and problems it causes in your actual waking life. That's the difference maker.
So, to really wrap our heads around this, we first need to get a little more specific. We've got to differentiate between the different kinds of things that go bump in the night in our minds. This is a really crucial distinction to make. See, nightmares usually happen during REM sleep. That's our main dreaming stage, which is exactly why we remember them in such vivid, terrifying detail. Now, night terrors, they're a whole different animal. They happen in deep, non-REM sleep. Someone might scream, thrash around, but when they wake up, they have zero memory of what was so scary. And a bad dream, well, you can think of that as just a less intense version of a nightmare.
So what are these nightmares actually about? Well, it turns out there's a lot of common ground. The classic stuff, being chased, falling from a great height, showing up for a final exam you completely forgot about. These themes are practically universal. They tap right into our deepest, most primal fears about survival, about failure, and about losing control. All right, so that's the what. But what about the why? Why do we have them in the first place? Well, as it turns out, the triggers are very often rooted directly in our waking lives.
Yeah, the list of potential causes is pretty long. Chronic stress is a huge one, no surprise there. But also things like certain medications, substance use, or even just being sleep deprived can do it. In every case, it's like your brain is trying to process something, and sometimes that process just goes completely off the rails into terror.
But maybe the most powerful trigger of them all is trauma. Get this, a staggering 80% of people with PTSD report having recurring nightmares. For them, it's not just a bad dream. It's the mind literally reliving a horrifying event, night after night, trying and failing to make sense of it.
And this is where things can get really complicated, because our reaction to a nightmare can actually trap us in this awful, vicious cycle. You have a nightmare, which makes you think, oh no, this is a bad omen, or something is wrong with me. That belief causes anxiety about sleeping, which then makes you, well, more likely to have nightmares. It's a horrible, self-fulfilling prophecy fueled by fear.
But here's where we pivot, because the word nightmare, it's escaped the bedroom. It's become this powerful metaphor we use for things that horrify us in the real world, when our eyes are wide open.
It just perfectly captures that feeling, doesn't it? That sense of helplessness, of events spiraling completely out of your control. That's a nightmare, whether you're asleep or awake.
Just think about technology. You see articles from places like the Harvard Business Review using the term ethical nightmares to talk about the dark side of AI and other new tech. And it fits. Things like mass surveillance or deepfake videos, these are real societal anxieties that feel just as scary as any dream. Or look at this headline. This journal calls systemic corruption a nightmare for public services. Again, the word is perfect. It captures that feeling of being trapped inside a broken, predatory system you just can't escape.
And when you break it down, you can really see the anatomy of this waking nightmare. You've got fraud, nepotism, bribery. Each one is like its own monster, undermining public trust and making daily life feel like a constant struggle against some invisible force.
So whether it's a dream or a real-world problem, the question is the same. How do we confront this darkness? How do we wake up? Well, fortunately, there are ways to start rewriting the script. For sleep nightmares, one of the most effective treatments is something called Imagery Rehearsal Therapy, or IRT. It's this fascinating technique where you consciously recall the nightmare, but then, and this is the key, you actively change the ending. You rewrite it into something positive, or at least something you can control. Then, you just mentally rehearse that new, empowering version every day. You're basically training your brain to steer the dream down a different path.
What therapies like RIT are really doing, on a much deeper level, is helping us confront what the psychologist Carl Jung called the shadow. The shadow is basically all the parts of ourselves that we repress or deny, the things we don't like to admit are there. So by confronting the monsters in our dreams, we're kind of practicing how to confront the parts of ourselves we're afraid of.
This all leads us to a final and really powerful idea. What if nightmares aren't just a bug, a problem to be solved? What if they actually have a purpose?
I think this quote just nails it. Think of a nightmare as a psychological fire alarm. Yeah, it's loud, it's terrifying, and it's meant to shock you. But its only purpose is to get you to pay attention to a danger you've been completely ignoring.
This completely changes how you look at it, right? Instead of just trying to make the nightmare go away, what if we asked what it was trying to tell us? Suddenly, it's not an attack. It's a call to action from the deepest part of your own mind.
And maybe that's the ultimate lesson here. As Jung reminds us, darkness is part of a whole life. You can't have light without shadow or happiness without sadness. Our nightmares, as truly terrifying as they are part of that essential balance.
And that's the question I really want to leave you with. The next time you wake up, heart pounding in the dark, what if you don't just try to push it away? What if you actually listen to it and ask what it wants? What if it's not a random terror, but an urgent invitation to wake up in more ways than one?